of looking at multimedia and moving it toward scholarly activity. It still has merit. We're still going to pursue that notion. We want to talk about it today. We're going to just kind of rekindle some of those ideas and knock it around. Matter of fact, we have a piece of video we're going to show in just a moment of the first video conversation that we had. So the basic premise here is that there are a lot of things changing in education. Education is going through revolution and changes. We all know that. We can talk about that in other ways. I know you guys talk about that on Education Forum,
right.
For example. So with that change, I think in our teaching, our learning, all of our practices in terms of research and other things, we really need to take a look at where we're going. We need to be strategic and planful about those kinds of things. So in our discussions, we talked about the notion of video production and the creation of video learning moving toward scholarly activity. And when we say scholarly activity, we're going to define that in just a second, but I think in a general sense, we want to make sure that when we put in work, we come in, we do our research, our writing, our reading, our teaching, all of those things, and we come on camera and start to talk about things that we'll use in the classroom, things that we share with others. In a sense, a publication from a video format that receives the credit that it's due. And I think as we talk about this today and make more of this, make this a little more clear, it becomes important for us to have some sort of mechanism or process to review what we do in the video production side of things, and then have that recognized by bodies that would, for example, promotion and tenure committees and so forth. So that was the basic premise, that if we come on camera and we start working here to develop a piece of work, like a documentary, a piece of a lecture, or a panel discussion, or other things that we do in a television studio from a university side, that becomes helpful to us. It helps our students in terms of that mission. It helps us in our terms of our professional growth and promotion and tenure and other things as well. So that's where we're at, and that was kind of my recap. Now, you may remember this differently, so I'll let you kind of jump in here. The notion of video production as scholarly activity.
Yeah, and I do think it has been a couple years since we first brought this up.
Fast, yeah.
And in this time, as we've played around with some of these ideas in our own work and within our discussions, I think it's become even more important to us in the field. As you opened with, education continues to change in very big ways, as society has. Technology over the last decade, it's no secret, has changed society in multiple ways.
Absolutely.
It's changed the way we work, it's changed the way we interact as a society, and certainly education has itself been changed by technology.
Absolutely. And still changing, I might add. We're
that's
not
absolutely
really sure
right.
where it's going.
Yeah, and that's an important piece. You know, in education with our students, our students who are going to be teachers, we talk about the fact that in schools, we've got to think about the fact that we're preparing students for jobs that we don't yet know exist. You know, that's very different from 20 years ago. And so it underlies your whole point. We don't know where education is going to take us. We certainly know where we are today as compared to a decade ago. And we'll get into some of the nuts and bolts here in a minute.
Yeah, I would just jump in on that particular point. You know, we have moved as a university, certainly as a college, and other colleges as well, but as a university as a whole, and maybe even the university system, more toward online distance learning, online classes, more teaching online. Now, that's another show for another time to talk about the advantages and disadvantages of that. There's certainly a lot of questions about it.
Sure.
But a lot of that is made up of recording of videos and showing other videos. And I was looking at a class not long ago that actually sends you out the websites to watch videos and then come back and do an assignment in class. So that's, just to jump in on that particular point, there's already a lot of video use. You mentioned in our very first discussion that really the use of video in the classroom was somewhere that started when television started back in the 50s, actually, and has continued to move. I think we need to get and manage this somehow. Get a grip on this, what we're doing with video production that is useful, that is thought of. You know, everybody has a video camera on their phone, recording everywhere now. There's a lot of questionable things, out there. But what we do is with a mission and with an intent, and I think that's what we need to focus on. I'm sorry to jump in there,
Absolutely.
but when you talked about that change.
That's right.
education.
And that's really to the point of, I think, what we wanted to take a few minutes this morning to discuss is how we can address the need for a very mission-oriented, targeted way of analyzing the work in higher ed, the multimedia work specifically in higher ed, and determining what's scholarly and what's not scholarly. Because as we'll talk about in a few minutes, that's critical to what we do in higher ed. It's critical that we produce scholarly work. People outside of higher ed don't understand what that means.
They may not.
The
They may
importance
not.
of that. After all, don't we just teach classes? But teaching classes is a small part of what we do. And just as we're being asked in K through 12 schools to integrate technology, and particularly multimedia, into our instruction more and more, here at the university, at the university system across the country, we're being challenged to do that for multiple reasons.
Well, yeah,
and we've got to be able to respond and understand how to get good at that.
Right.
And we have to recognize, we have to have a mechanism for recognizing professionals in institutions of higher ed who are good at that.
yeah, I don't think there's a process for it. I'm not sure that we have the standards even
Right.
for that kind of process. You know, we talked a good deal in our first conversation about the publication process and print media, that
Yeah.
seems to be the pinnacle. That's the standard, that you research, you actually do an experiment or research in some way, or do a correlational study, but you gather data from the scientific method, you write that manuscript, you submit it to a journal, and that journal has to be peer reviewed. Usually a national journal, and so there are always layers of that. But generally speaking, it goes under peer review from experts in the field. You get feedback about that, you make some adjustments, you may have to resubmit, and so forth, until it's accepted for publication in a well-known, well-thought-of journal in the area that and discipline you're in. That's, to me, nothing wrong with that process. That it's stood the test of time. But in some ways, when we talk about the new media that's coming on in education, the things we just talked about a moment ago, that seems to be a very narrow, narrow opportunity, a very kind of one way to get promoted and tenured, one way to establish your scholarly activity, when I think this paradigm shift that's happening with video production is going to open up this a little bit more. And I'm curious to see how that's going to go.
That's absolutely right. And I think at this point it's important to recognize, beyond might refer to as promotion and tenure at the university, which is the idea of you being recognized as a professor, say, as somebody that's doing good work in your field. There's a scale you get promoted on, and tenure is the ability to reach a point at which in your career a university says, we will invest in you for life, to have some what we call academic freedom, to do some things here at the university that otherwise might be difficult for you to do. And of course, tenure comes with all sorts of pieces to it, that
Right, sure.
responsibility that we won't get into here. But my point being, scholarly activity is important for promotion and tenure, but it's important for a reason. And one of the main reasons is, traditionally at the academy, we use publications as a way to communicate professionally with one another. The peer review process is all about assuring that what we communicate is communicated, first off, what we communicate is accurate,
Right. Absolutely.
but it's communicated in a well thought out way. And it's one of the main reasons the academy has served over the last couple of centuries, not just in this country, but across the world, as the place where we produce knowledge, where we produce new knowledge and new ways of thinking.
Right.
We've traditionally, over the last couple of decades, communicated in writing these ideas.
Right.
What's huge, I think, where we're at now, in terms of the overused term paradigm shift, I
Right.
think, is the fact that we are now culturally in multiple sectors looking at communicating in ways other than writing or in addition to writing.
Right.
And multimedia is the way that we're doing that. And yet we don't have a mechanism right now to peer review our multimedia communications in a way that vets for accuracy,
Right.
but also vets for how well something is communicated, ultimately to help advance our various disciplines. Because we don't have that mechanism, I think it's important, and this is where you and I have come together in the last couple of years to talk about how can we establish that mechanism, the mechanism for peer review. Because certainly there's ways of communicating something in writing that's good,
Right.
but there's also ways of communicating something using media that's good.
See,
But they're
that's
not equivalent.
that's the crucial point, I think, here. If you, for example, let's take the writing piece of it. You're an editorial board reviewer for a journal. You get the manuscript, and you're going to spend time going through. You're going to look at grammar. For example, you're going to look at sentence structure. Is this a run-on sentence? Is it an awkward sentence? Is it the wording and phrasing and so forth, as well as the actual content?
Right.
You're going to look at the scientific method. You're going to look at whether the research was done properly. Did they use the right, did they find all the literature that either supports or negates their point? You're going to look at graphs and charts and tables. You're going to use significant